The sun hung low over the Nevada desert, burning orange and gold across the endless stretches of sand that framed Nelly's Air Force Base. The wind kicked up in sporadic gusts, rattling the metal fences and lifting dust that clung to the boots of every pilot marching across the tarmac. For Captain Riley Hayes, stepping off the transport plane felt like stepping onto a battlefield of perception, one where her own body and reputation would be under siege before a single mission began. She adjusted the strap of her flight bag, feeling the weight of it press against her shoulder. Not heavy physically, but heavy with expectation, and more importantly, judgment. Riley wasn't just the new girl. She was the new girl, the youngest pilot in her squadron, barely 24 and the smallest in stature, with sharp green eyes and a demeanor that carried calm where others expected fear. She had trained for this her whole life, yet walking across that tarmac, she felt every eye on her, evaluating, calculating whether she belonged. The squadron was already gathered near the F-15s, their silhouettes long and angular in the fading light. These weren't just pilots, they were legends in the making, each with a record of missions that could make a veteran's jaw drop. And now, Riley was entering their world. A small, seemingly insignificant anomaly in a formation built on bravado, precision, and ego. A tall pilot with a buzz cut and a jaw like chiseled granite glanced at her as she approached. He smirked, eyes scanning from head to toe as if measuring her likelihood of surviving even a single sortie. "Fresh meat," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few others to catch. Laughter rippled through the group. It was subtle at first, but Riley caught the undercurrent, the kind of derision that cut quietly, like wind through a canyon. Riley's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile. She ignored them. She had learned long ago that reactions were currency in this world. Giving one away for free could be dangerous. Her focus was on the jet before her, its sleek frame glinting under the desert sun, engines idling with a low, threatening growl. The flight commander, Lieutenant Colonel Mason, approached, clipboard in hand, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He stopped just short of Riley, sizing her up. "Captain Hayes, reports say you're sharp. We'll see if that holds up in the air." Riley met his gaze evenly. "I intend to prove it, sir." The commander's lips twitched, almost a smile, almost a warning. "Good, you'll need every ounce of it." He turned sharply, calling the squadron to attention. "All right, people, eyes forward. Welcome the new pilot. And remember, this isn't kindergarten. Keep it professional." The words echoed in Riley's ears as she moved closer to the jet. She ran her hands along the canopy, tracing the sleek contours with fingers that had memorized every curve and bolt during training simulations. She knew the machine intimately, even if her peers didn't yet respect her. Every switch, every lever, every dial had a place, a rhythm, a purpose, and she would master it. From the corner of her eye, she saw the tall pilot still watching, a smirk still plastered on his face. "Bet she folds under pressure," he said, louder this time, just enough for Riley to hear. The others snickered, some shaking their heads, but Riley didn't flinch. She only lifted her chin slightly and continued her pre-flight inspection, methodical, precise. As the sun sank lower, casting the squadron in sharp silhouettes, Riley climbed into the cockpit. She felt the familiar squeeze of the harness, the way it wrapped her in restraint and protection simultaneously. Her boots clicked against the metal foot pedals and she reached for the throttle. The engine roared, sending vibrations through her body, but the sound wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, raw and intoxicating. Over the radio, chatter buzzed like a swarm of hornets. "New girl, you hear that? Don't choke on the first climb," one voice jabbed. Riley didn't respond. She had no intention of giving them satisfaction. The squadron lined up behind her for a formation takeoff. Engines screamed in harmony, a mechanical symphony that could break nerves or steel resolve. Riley's pulse matched the rhythm, steady and calm. She felt the heat of the tarmac through the soles of her boots and the wind tugging at the canopy. She was small, yes, but she was ready. The tower cleared them for takeoff. One by one, the jets lifted into the air, a ballet of raw power and precision. Riley's jet climbed smoothly, but even as she ascended, a bead of sweat traced her temple. She was conscious of every sound, every vibration, every minor fluctuation of air pressure. The other pilots, hovering slightly above her in formation, whispered again. "Look at her posture, she's tense." Riley allowed herself a flicker of irritation. Tension was not weakness. Tension was awareness, and awareness was what kept pilots alive. As they leveled out, the desert stretched endlessly below them, mountains jagged against the horizon. Riley's heart raced, not with fear but with focus. She could hear the faint echoes of mocking laughter in the radio static, but it was distant, almost insignificant compared to the roar of the engine and the pull of gravity. Then the unthinkable happened. A small vibration ran through the jet, subtle but undeniable. Riley's fingers danced across the controls, checking systems. Everything should have been normal. Her eyes flicked to the instrument panel. One warning light blinked red. Her stomach tightened. She knew what it meant, a potential failure that could become catastrophic if mishandled. But Riley did not panic. She had trained for simulations that mimicked engine failure, emergency maneuvers, and high-altitude recoveries countless times. This was the real test. The other pilots ahead of her in formation had not yet noticed. They were still smirking, still whispering. But Riley's mind worked faster than the chatter around her. Every thought, every movement was focused. She toggled switches, rerouted power, checked secondary systems. The vibration intensified slightly, the red light blinking faster now. A bead of sweat ran down her temple. She swallowed hard. One wrong move and she could lose the plane. One miscalculation and the squadron's laughter would become regret, or worse, tragedy. Her radio crackled. "Hayes, you copy." The voice was clipped, professional, but underneath she sensed curiosity. A new variable had entered the squadron dynamic, the unknown factor of Riley Hayes, the new girl. Riley tightened her grip on the controls. "Copy," she replied. "All systems operational, running diagnostics." There was a pause on the other end of the comm, almost as if her confidence had caught someone off guard. The sun dipped fully below the horizon now, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. Dust swirled around the desert floor far below. Riley adjusted her course, keeping formation but with a subtle awareness that something bigger than mockery was testing her tonight. And as she flew, alone in her cockpit but surrounded by eyes, seen and unseen, she felt it. The tension of expectation, the weight of judgment, the spark of something more. The mission was only beginning, and Riley Hayes, small, underestimated, and fiercely determined, was about to prove she was not the rookie they thought she was. A shadow flickered across her instruments. She didn't recognize it, but it made her pulse quicken. Something, or someone, was watching. And in the world of fighter pilots, being watched could mean opportunity or danger. Her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Watch me," she thought, as the desert night swallowed the tarmac below. And then the radio buzzed again. "Captain Hayes, you just became everyone's problem." The morning sun burned pale gold across the desert, bouncing off the polished metal of the F-15s as Riley Hayes approached the flight line. The chill from the early hours clung stubbornly to her jacket, but it was nothing compared to the tension coiling in her stomach. Today was her first official flight with the squadron, and every eye that turned toward her felt like a loaded gun. She could hear them before she even saw them. The snickers, the murmurs, the subtle jabs meant to undermine her confidence. "Hey, rookie, don't trip over your own jet," a tall, broad-shouldered pilot called out, his tone half joking, half derisive. Another chimed in, voice dripping with mock concern. "Make sure you breathe when you're at 20,000 feet. It's kind of important." Riley's jaw tightened. She had endured whispers and doubt all her life, but the military was different. Here, mistakes could be fatal. And yet, despite the weight of their skepticism, she moved forward with quiet assurance. Her hands traced the rivets along her jet's fuselage, a tactile reminder that this machine, unlike the people judging her, responded to precision and respect. She climbed into the cockpit, the harness pressing firmly against her chest like a reminder of mortality itself. The helmet slid over her head, muffling the chatter around her but sharpening the hum of the engines into something visceral, primal. Over the radio, the mocking continued. "You ready, rookie?" someone asked. "Yes," Riley replied, voice steady, almost deceptively calm. "All systems nominal." They laughed, a short, sharp burst that seemed to slice through the early morning air. "Nominal? That's cute," one voice sneered. "Let's see how long that lasts." The formation took off in unison, jets streaking into the sky like silver bullets. Riley's plane responded perfectly to every adjustment, her hands and feet moving with the grace and precision of countless hours in simulators. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes, judging, measuring, waiting for her to fail. Within minutes, the teasing escalated into something more pointed. "Hey, rookie," a pilot called over comms, "try not to flip upside down. I don't want to have to rescue you from the desert." Another chimed in, "Careful on the G-turns, don't faint this early." The comments stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were completely underestimating her. Riley gritted her teeth, tightening her grip on the throttle. Let them think she was fragile. Let them underestimate her. Then, mid-ascent, her jet shuddered. A minor vibration at first, barely perceptible but enough to make Riley's stomach tighten. Her eyes flicked to the instrument panel. A warning light blinked red. The mocking voices erupted immediately. "What's wrong, rookie? Need a hand?" Riley's pulse quickened, but she didn't panic. She had trained for this exact scenario countless times in the simulators. Her fingers danced across the controls, toggling systems, rerouting power and checking redundancies. The plane shuddered again, sharper this time, and she felt the slightest pull downward. Her stomach lurched, but her expression remained calm behind the visor. "You're not going to bail, right?" someone taunted. "Not today," she muttered under her breath. Her training kicked in instinctively. She adjusted the flaps, modulated the engine power, and corrected the trajectory. Slowly, the vibration lessened, but the red warning light remained, a silent reminder that the danger hadn't passed. Riley kept her focus razor-sharp, every movement measured, every decision critical. The other pilots, oblivious to the subtle crisis, continued their teasing. "I thought you were supposed to be the new prodigy," one said. "Looks like the desert, going to claim you before lunch." Riley's lips curved slightly, just enough to suggest a smirk. Let them mock. It would make the moment of proving herself all the sweeter. But the tension wasn't just external. Inside her, a storm raged. Every muscle was taut, every nerve fired. The desert below was a distant, jagged landscape of mountains and sand, but it could become a tomb in seconds if she miscalculated. Her pulse was steady, but her mind raced. The first real test wasn't about skill, it was about control, composure, and patience under fire. Then came the challenge. The formation was ordered to perform a synchronized bank, a maneuver designed to test coordination and reflexes under extreme G-forces. Riley adjusted her plane, feeling the stress on her body as she matched the turn with the others. But the vibration returned, stronger than before, as if the jet itself was warning her of impending failure. The mocking chatter grew louder. "Careful there, rookie. Don't want to see your parachute open before the canyon." Riley's heart pounded in rhythm with the engines. Sweat beaded under her helmet. One wrong move and the jet could spin out of control, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Slowly, methodically, she corrected the oscillation, rerouted auxiliary systems, and regained stability. Her plane leveled, the warning light still blinking but the immediate danger contained. Silence fell over the radio. The others hadn't expected her to recover so quickly. The sudden absence of mockery was almost louder than the teasing had been, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected. Riley allowed herself a brief exhale. She was still in control. She was still standing, or flying, rather, and she hadn't even begun to show them her edge. Then over the radio, the voice of Lieutenant Colonel Mason cut through, sharp and clipped. "Captain Hayes, keep your focus. Formation drills aren't over yet, and good recovery." A brief flicker of surprise passed through the squadron's chatter. Good recovery. From the new girl. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief, and Riley felt the tiniest spark of vindication. But before she could savor it, a new tension emerged. A shadow flickered across the HUD, an irregular blip that didn't match any friendly aircraft. Riley's pulse quickened. She scanned the instruments, running a mental checklist. Nothing should have been there. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the comms. "Unidentified blip on my radar. Maintaining course, monitoring systems." The squadron murmured among themselves, confusion mixing with lingering mockery. Riley's heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of the unknown. This was a new battlefield, one that demanded focus, ingenuity, and nerves of steel. And as the desert sun climbed higher, baking the tarmac below and glinting off the sleek lines of metal jets, Riley knew one thing with certainty. Today wasn't about proving she could fly. Today was about showing them all that the new girl was something entirely different, someone they hadn't anticipated, someone they weren't ready for, someone who could survive when everything seemed to conspire against her. The mocking would continue, the challenges would multiply, and the stakes would grow higher. But Riley Hayes, small in stature but enormous in determination, was ready. And as the formation banked sharply over the desert, the engines screaming like wild animals, the first seeds of respect and fear were planted in the hearts of those who had once doubted her. Her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk behind the visor. Let them watch. Let them mock. They have no idea what's coming. And then in the corner of her HUD, a second, larger warning light blinked, a silent signal that the real test had just begun. The desert stretched endlessly below, jagged mountains casting sharp shadows across valleys of sand. The sun had climbed high enough to glare off the jet's canopy, making Riley Hayes squint behind her visor. Her fingers moved over the controls with mechanical precision, but a cold knot had settled in her stomach. The vibration in her jet had returned, worse this time. Her instincts screamed that this was no minor hiccup. A warning light blinked red on the HUD, Engine 1 fluctuating. Riley's pulse tightened. Engine failure was the kind of thing pilots trained for but hoped never to experience in real life. A single miscalculation, a split-second hesitation, and the result could be fatal. She swallowed, keeping her breathing steady, forcing herself to focus. "Control, this is Hayes," she spoke calmly over the radio. "Engine 1 unstable, running diagnostics, maintaining altitude as best as possible." Static buzzed in response. The other pilots, still in formation ahead, had no idea she was in danger. Their chatter over the radio was still light-hearted, mocking. "Hayes, you hanging in there, rookie," someone called. The laugh at the end of the sentence made her jaw clench. Riley ignored it, her eyes flicking between instruments. Engine 1's RPM was fluctuating wildly. Engine 2 was stable, but the warning lights indicated that she was losing thrust. Altitude bled away faster than she liked. She had trained for engine failures, yes, but this felt different. It was real, raw, and unpredictable. Her hands moved over switches instinctively, rerouting auxiliary power, adjusting fuel mixes, engaging backup systems. Each correction brought a fraction of stability, but the jet still shuddered violently with every maneuver. The mocking voices came again over the radio. "Bet she can't even make it back to base," one sneered. "Better start thinking about a parachute, rookie." Riley's teeth ground together, but she didn't flinch. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every second required focus, calculation, and composure. Her eyes scanned the canyon below, the winding paths, rocky outcroppings, unforgiving terrain. One wrong turn, one slight misjudgment, and the desert would claim her. She adjusted the throttle, banking sharply to stabilize the plane. The wind roared past the canopy, shrieking in her ears. She felt the pull of gravity, tugging her down, testing her limits. Every muscle in her body tensed as she fought for control. Suddenly, a loud clunk echoed from the cockpit. Riley's heart skipped a beat. Another warning light flashed, hydraulic pressure low. Her stomach dropped. Now, not only was Engine 1 failing, but her flight controls could go with it. She had no time to think beyond the immediate steps. Her hands moved with a rhythm she didn't know she possessed, flipping switches, cycling backup hydraulics, recalibrating the autopilot. "Hayes, you copy," Mason's voice barked over comms. Even he sounded concerned this time. "Copy, sir," Riley replied, her voice calm despite the storm inside her chest. Engine 1 fluctuating, hydraulic pressure low, stabilizing. There was a pause on the other end. The squadron that had mocked her before was now silent. For the first time, they were paying attention. She leaned forward in the cockpit, scanning her instruments. A small green light blinked, indicating partial control restored. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep the jet alive. Riley's mind raced, calculating altitude, speed, wind direction, and fuel levels. Each decision carried life-or-death weight. Then she noticed movement on her HUD, blips of another aircraft maneuvering in the same airspace. They were F-22s from a neighboring squadron, elite pilots performing drills nearby. They hadn't radioed, hadn't announced their presence. And suddenly, they were in the same sky as her, circling, evaluating. "Hayes," one pilot's voice came over the comm, tone incredulous. "Engine trouble and you're still in formation." Riley's pulse quickened, not with fear but with adrenaline. The real test wasn't just surviving the mechanical failure. It was proving herself in front of the elite, proving that the new girl wasn't a liability. Her jet shuddered violently again, the red warning light blinking like a strobe in her peripheral vision. She tightened her grip on the controls, overriding instinctive fear. Slowly, methodically, she executed an emergency procedure she had only practiced twice in a simulator. Partial throttle cut, a sharp bank to stabilize airspeed, then gradual correction of pitch to regain control. The turbulence subsided slightly. Riley allowed herself a fraction of relief, but only a fraction. Engine 1 was still failing, hydraulic pressure was still fluctuating, and the F-22s were still watching, their presence a silent judgment. The mocking voices returned over the comm, but this time there was hesitation. "Rookie, are you okay?" Riley's lips curved into the faintest smirk behind her helmet. "I'm fine," she replied. Her voice was calm, steady, unwavering. She didn't let them hear the tension in her chest, the sweat on her brow, or the sheer calculation racing through her mind. The next challenge came without warning. A sharp downdraft swept through the canyon, tossing her jet like a leaf in a storm. The plane tilted dangerously, warning lights flashing, instruments jerking. Riley's heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time, a flicker of real fear passed through her mind. But fear was fuel, and she used it. Hands moving in perfect synchronization, she corrected the tilt, banking sharply to counter the downdraft while rerouting power from Engine 2 to compensate for the failing Engine 1. The jet responded, stabilizing almost miraculously. The F-22 pilots went silent. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by shock. Somehow, the rookie was still alive, still in control, still performing maneuvers that should have been impossible given her failing systems. Riley's pulse raced, but she allowed herself a sliver of satisfaction. She had survived the first real test. She had stared at mechanical failure and raw danger and refused to back down. Yet even as the adrenaline surged through her veins, she knew this was only the beginning. Engine 1's failure was not fully resolved. Hydraulic systems were unstable, and the F-22 pilots, elite, arrogant, and deadly, were still circling, watching her every move, waiting for a mistake. Her mind flicked through calculations, emergency procedures, and backup maneuvers. Every muscle ached from tension. Every thought was a calculation of survival. And then faintly, almost imperceptibly, a new light blinked on her HUD. It wasn't red or yellow, just green but distinct. A signal unknown, unexpected. Riley's pulse spiked. Someone or something was observing her, not judging, observing. She gritted her teeth, keeping focus. "Okay," she muttered to herself. "Keep control, keep calm, keep flying." The desert stretched endlessly below, indifferent, lethal, beautiful. Riley Hayes, the mocked rookie, the new girl, was alive. She was still in the air, and she was about to show the world that the failure of her plane would not be her failure. But just as she adjusted course for a safer altitude, another sharp vibration tore through the fuselage. The jet shuddered violently, warning lights flashing in a staccato rhythm. Riley's breath caught, eyes widening behind her visor. The next move would determine everything, survival or disaster. And the squadron that had laughed at her just yesterday now fell silent, watching as the rookie, the smallest, youngest, underestimated pilot, prepared to defy the odds once again. The canyon walls below stretched like jagged teeth, shadows twisting in the sunlight as Riley Hayes fought to keep her jet alive. The red warning lights still blinked aggressively, engine 1 fluctuating, hydraulic systems unstable. But somehow, against every prediction, she remained airborne. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling beneath her helmet, and her fingers moved with a precision born from hours of intense training, nerves, and sheer willpower. Her voice over the radio was calm, measured. "Control, this is Hayes. Engine 1 unstable, hydraulic pressure low. Maintaining altitude as best as possible, adjusting trajectory for canyon clearance." The F-22 pilots, circling above, were silent. No mockery now, no laughter, just tense observation. Riley could feel their eyes through the radio, judgment shifting from derision to incredulity. She had survived situations that would have broken most rookies, and she was still flying with the calm of someone who had done this before. Lieutenant Colonel Mason's voice came through, clipped and serious. "Hayes, I need a call sign." Riley froze for a fraction of a second. A call sign. Normally, these were earned after years of experience, feats, or reputation. She wasn't anywhere near that level yet. And yet, now was the moment. Something in her chest tightened, not fear but defiance. She was the new girl, underestimated by everyone around her, and this was her chance to carve her identity into the air itself. She gritted her teeth, exhaled slowly, and spoke clearly, "Ghostfire." There was a beat of silence. The squadron didn't respond immediately, as if the words themselves had hung in the air and shocked the radio waves. "Ghostfire," a voice finally whispered over the comms. It was one of the F-22 pilots, incredulous. That's unreal." Riley's pulse quickened. She felt a thrill coursing through her veins. It wasn't arrogance, she didn't have time for that, but it was something more primal, power, control, identity, Ghostfire. The name seemed to fit her, a shadow in the air, unpredictable, unstoppable, and dangerous. She focused back on the instruments. Engine 1 was still struggling, but her hands moved with confidence, rerouting auxiliary power, stabilizing systems. She had survived the mechanical failure so far. Now, it was about style, control, and showing the squadron, and the F-22 pilots, that the new girl was more than anyone expected. Over the comms, the squadron murmured among themselves. The earlier mockery had vanished, replaced by disbelief and curiosity. "Ghostfire," one muttered. "Is she serious?" Riley ignored the whispers. She adjusted her throttle and banking angle, performing a maneuver she had only practiced once in a simulator, a high-risk roll through a narrow canyon gap. Her stomach dropped with the sharp turn, but the jet responded to her control like an extension of her own body. The F-22 pilots gasped, or so Riley imagined. Their earlier arrogance had melted into fascination. Ghostfire wasn't just a name now. It was a statement, an identity forged in fire, smoke, and adrenaline. Her HUD flickered, but she barely noticed. Engine 1 was still unstable, yet somehow she maintained perfect control. Every twist, every roll, every dive felt like a dance with death, and she was leading. The other pilots tried to follow, attempting to mimic her maneuvers, but the gap between them and Ghostfire was obvious. Their confidence faltered. They realized that this rookie, this underestimated, mocked, barely recognized pilot, was rewriting the rules of the airspace. "Hayes, your altitude is dropping slightly," Mason's voice reminded her, though there was no scolding, only concern now. "Copy, sir," she replied, adjusting the throttle and applying slight rudder pressure. The jet shuddered, but her maneuvers compensated. The canyon below stretched like a living labyrinth, unforgiving and sharp-edged, but she navigated it with grace and precision. Her mind raced with possibilities. Ghostfire was no longer just a call sign. It was a persona, a promise, a warning. The F-22 pilots had expected a rookie, someone to mock and overtake. Instead, they were witnessing a calculated, fearless pilot who refused to be defined by skepticism or underestimation. Suddenly, a sharp vibration ran through the fuselage. Riley's heart jumped. Engine 1 faltered again, the red warning light flaring. She had seconds to act. With fluid movements, she switched to emergency fuel lines, adjusted air intake valves, and engaged the secondary hydraulic system. The jet shuddered violently, then stabilized. A stunned silence fell over the comms. The F-22 pilots, elite and experienced, could barely believe what they had just witnessed. One voice crackled, incredulous. "Ghostfire, how is she still in control?" Riley didn't answer. She only focused on the instruments, keeping the jet steady. The canyon walls blurred past, the wind screaming in her ears. She had survived mechanical failure, defied the mockery of her peers, and now earned a new kind of recognition, one that carried weight, respect, and fear. Her mind shifted, calculating next moves. There was a line of clouds ahead, a perfect place to regain altitude while masking her maneuvers from the observing pilots. Ghostfire was no longer a rookie. She was a force to be reckoned with. As she leveled the jet, a new realization hit her. This was more than survival. This was mastery. Every motion, every adjustment, every heartbeat was a symphony of skill and instinct. She was not only controlling the plane, she was dominating it, bending it to her will while the world watched. The comms buzzed again, hesitant this time. Her squadron finally spoke, voices tinged with awe. "Hayes, Ghostfire, you're unreal." Riley allowed herself a faint smile. The name had been her choice, her declaration, her identity. Now it carried power, and with that power came expectation. But she didn't care. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment where all the doubt, all the mockery, all the skepticism dissolved into the roar of engines and the rush of wind. And yet, even as she felt the surge of triumph, a flicker of tension ran through her chest. The F-22 pilots were still circling, watching, calculating, evaluating. Ghostfire had revealed herself, but the next challenge, the real test, was still coming. Riley's hands gripped the controls tighter. She had survived the failure, stunned the squadron, and announced herself to the elite F-22 pilots. But the sky was vast, and the danger was far from over. The sun reflected off the canyon walls, glinting like molten metal. Ghostfire, the name, the legend in the making, was born, and the pilots who had once mocked her were left with only one thought in their minds: we have underestimated her, and that was a mistake. A sudden flicker on the HUD caught her eye, a small, irregular signal, unrecognized, unpredictable. Riley's pulse quickened. Ghostfire was alive, unstoppable, but the real test was approaching. She leaned forward slightly in her cockpit, eyes narrowing. Let them watch, she thought. Let them learn what Ghostfire is capable of. Sky was hers for now. And in the distance, the shadow of a storm was gathering, both literal and metaphorical. The desert stretched far below, a tapestry of jagged ridges and deep canyons, but Riley Hayes had no time to admire it. Her jet roared like a beast in the sky, every vibration a reminder that Engine 1 was still unstable. Yet she was alive, defiant, and unbroken. Ghostfire had made herself known, and now the consequences were arriving faster than the wind whipping past her canopy. The F-22 pilots, elite warriors in the air, were circling closer. Their presence was no longer passive observation. It was a calculated challenge. These were the best of the best flying aircraft designed to dominate, their reputations built on years of unmatched skill. And now, Riley Hayes, a rookie with a failing jet, was in their airspace, refusing to yield. Ghostfire, one of the F-22 pilots, finally said, voice tense over the comms, "What are you doing up here? You shouldn't even be in formation." Riley tightened her grip on the controls. She didn't respond verbally. Actions were louder than words. Every adjustment of throttle, every flick of a switch, every bank and roll of her jet was a statement. "I belong here." Suddenly, one of the F-22s accelerated, banking sharply as if to cut her off. The roar of its engines was louder than any voice, a predator announcing its intent. Riley's pulse quickened, but she didn't panic. This was the moment she had trained for, the crucible of skill, focus, and instinct. Her jet shuddered violently as Engine 1 faltered again. A surge of red warning lights blinked across her HUD. The F-22 drew closer. She was outclassed in raw machinery but not in strategy. She banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a rocky ridge, and felt the pull of gravity squeeze her chest. "Ghostfire, you're gonna regret this," one pilot shouted, their arrogance replaced with a flicker of genuine concern. Riley's mind worked faster than the words could reach her ears. She scanned the canyon below, searching for options. A narrow passage opened ahead, barely wide enough for her jet. It was risky. An error of inches could tear her plane apart, but it offered a chance to shake her pursuers. With a calculated breath, she dove. The canyon walls blurred past, close enough to taste. The F-22s hesitated, unable to follow immediately. Riley banked sharply, the jet groaning under the strain, and threaded her way through the jagged passage. Heart pounding, lungs tight, she emerged with the horizon stretched open before her. The F-22 pilots weren't deterred. If anything, their eyes burned brighter with curiosity and challenge. They were predators chasing a ghost, and Ghostfire, Riley, was just beginning her game. Another surge of vibration ran through her jet. Engine 1 was failing harder now. Hydraulic pressure flickered. Riley's hands moved over controls with surgical precision, rerouting power, compensating for thrust loss, stabilizing flight. She had no margin for error. One wrong move and this canyon could become her tomb. One F-22 pulled closer, banking sharply to cut her off. Riley dove into a steep turn, the G-forces pressing her into the seat. The jet shuddered violently, instruments jerking. Her hands flew over controls, counteracting the instability, her mind calculating trajectory, wind, and velocity. Every maneuver was survival and statement all at once. She had trained for emergencies, for simulations, for the impossible, but nothing had prepared her for this. Real danger, real stakes, real lives balanced on the edge of instinct and skill. The adrenaline surged, clarity sharpening her senses to almost superhuman focus. Then came the moment she had been waiting for. A straight stretch of canyon opened, narrow but perfect for a maneuver she had practiced only once. A sharp barrel roll followed by an inverted dive that would momentarily confuse any pursuing pilot. Riley took the risk. Her jet twisted violently, the world spinning around her, as the roll executed perfectly. The F-22s struggled to match the maneuver, their elite training unable to anticipate a rookie with audacious skill and a failing aircraft. The canyon below seemed to stretch and compress in her vision, a dizzying blur, but she felt the rhythm of the jet like a heartbeat beneath her hands. As she leveled out, she saw the reactions on the HUD of the F-22 pilots: surprise, disbelief, hesitation. Ghostfire was no longer just a name. She was a threat, an enigma, and a force they hadn't accounted for. "Who is she?" one pilot muttered over comms, almost in awe. "Ghostfire, she's insane." Riley didn't answer. She couldn't afford distraction. Another surge of vibration ran through the fuselage. Engine 1 was barely holding. Hydraulic pressure was fluctuating dangerously. She had to act. She toggled emergency fuel lines, engaged secondary stabilizers, and adjusted pitch and yaw to maintain control. Her mind raced, every calculation precise, every movement decisive. She could feel the jet trembling beneath her like a living creature, responding to her will. The F-22s, now regrouping, began a coordinated maneuver. They were testing her, pushing, probing for weaknesses. Riley's pulse raced, but the fear that could have consumed her was transformed into clarity. Every movement of the jets, every signal from instruments, every threat from the environment was data, and she was using it all to survive and dominate. Then she noticed it, a faint irregularity on the HUD, a blinking green light she hadn't recognized before. Not a warning, not a failure, something else. Observation, guidance. She didn't know, but it added another layer of tension, another unknown in a sky full of threats. Ignoring it for now, Riley focused on the immediate challenge. One F-22 tried a head-on approach, banking sharply to block her escape. Riley dove, twisting her jet in a serpentine motion, barely scraping the canyon wall. The F-22 mirrored her turn but was slower, larger, less flexible. She had gained the advantage. Her voice over comms was calm but firm. Ghostfire, maintaining control, assessing trajectory for countermaneuvers. The F-22s faltered, hesitation flashing in their coordination. Ghostfire was not just surviving. She was manipulating the environment, the enemy, and the physics of flight to her advantage. For the first time, Riley allowed a spark of satisfaction. The mockery, the whispers, the doubts, they were gone. She had transformed the situation from survival to domination. She wasn't just the rookie. She was the hunted and the hunter all at once. But the danger wasn't over. Engine 1 was still failing, hydraulics unstable, and the F-22s were recalibrating, ready to strike again. Ghostfire had shown her skill, but the real test, the real chase, was just beginning. Riley's pulse raced, adrenaline fueling her precision. The canyon stretched ahead, narrow and twisting, the perfect stage for the next maneuver. Every inch counted. Every second was life or death. And she had only begun to prove what Ghostfire truly meant. The F-22s adjusted, ready to re-engage. Riley tightened her grip on the controls, leaning into the seat, heart hammering. The chase was far from over. And then over the comms, a voice crackled, low and incredulous. "Ghostfire, you're insane. How are you still flying?" Riley didn't answer. She only smiled faintly beneath her helmet. "Let them watch. Let them chase. They'll never catch me." The sky was hers for now, and the next move would determine everything: victory, survival, or disaster. The canyon walls stretched endlessly below, jagged and unforgiving, as Riley Hayes pushed her failing jet to its limits. Every vibration, every flicker of warning lights screamed danger, but she had become a machine of focus, a fusion of instinct, training, and sheer audacity. Ghostfire was no longer a name whispered in disbelief. It was a presence, a force that the F-22 pilots had no choice but to reckon with. Ahead, the F-22s adjusted their formation, circling in a coordinated attack. These were elite pilots, highly trained, highly confident, and yet now cautious. They weren't used to encountering a rookie who could survive engine failure, hydraulics instability, and a death-defying canyon chase all at once. The air around Riley thrummed with tension, the roar of engines like the heartbeat of a predator. Her HUD blinked erratically. Engine 1 was failing harder than before. The jet shuddered violently under her hands. Yet, every muscle in her body moved with precision. Her mind calculated altitude, thrust, and trajectory in real time, each decision balanced on the edge of life and death. Then came the moment. Ahead, a narrow canyon gap opened, a razor-thin path through jagged rock, impossible for the unskilled. Riley's pulse quickened. She had practiced a maneuver in the simulator only once before, a near-impossible twist that would test every ounce of her reflexes. But now, With the F-22s closing in and her failing jet groaning beneath her, there was no hesitation. "Here goes nothing," she muttered under her breath. She banked sharply, guiding her F-15 into the gap with inches to spare. The wind tore past the canopy as the jet twisted violently. She felt the pull of gravity squeeze her chest and arms. Instruments jerked in protest. Engine 1 sputtered dangerously, hydraulic pressure flickered, yet she moved with flawless precision, threading the needle through impossibly tight terrain. Behind her, the F-22s faltered. Their advanced jets were faster, more agile in raw speed, but they were larger, less flexible in narrow spaces, and unfamiliar with the canyon's twists. Ghostfire's audacious move had given her the advantage. Riley leveled out just beyond the canyon, taking a shallow dive to regain speed. Her eyes flicked to the HUD. The F-22 pilot's formation had broken. Confusion and disbelief were evident in the data streams: altitude changes, erratic banking, failed maneuvers. Ghostfire had turned the tables, and the elite pilots were scrambling to adapt. "Ghostfire, how did she?" A voice crackled over the comm, disbelief coloring every word. Riley didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her actions were speaking louder than any words. She banked sharply, executed a roll to the left, then a sudden dive, using the canyon walls as cover. Every maneuver was calculated to confuse, to destabilize, to assert dominance in the air. The squadron she had joined, pilots who had mocked her, whispered about her in doubt, watched from behind. Their jaws were slack, eyes wide. Riley had transformed from the new girl into a figure of awe, a ghost in the sky performing feats they couldn't have imagined. Her pulse still raced, adrenaline surging with every heartbeat. The red warning lights continued to blink. Engine 1 was failing, but she had stabilized flight enough to maintain control. Every instinct, every training scenario, every split-second calculation was now reality. The canyon had become her stage, the sky her arena. And then came the revelation, the moment that would be seared into the minds of everyone watching. Riley noticed an opening, a tight corridor between jagged rocks that could serve as both escape and display. She lined up the jet, throttled forward, and executed a maneuver no one expected. A full inverted roll, twisting the plane upside down, then diving through the narrow corridor at breakneck speed. The F-22 pilots gasped, silently, over the radio, through data feeds, through every observation channel. Ghostfire wasn't just surviving, she was rewriting the rules of engagement. "Holy," one pilot whispered, disbelief cutting off the words. She's insane." Riley leveled out just in time, the jet shuddering as Engine 1 groaned in protest. Hydraulic warning lights flickered, but she maintained perfect control. She felt a surge of exhilaration, not arrogance, just the pure, raw triumph of skill, focus, and instinct prevailing against impossible odds. Her squadron's chatter came next, hesitant, awe-filled. "Did you see that?" one muttered. "Riley, Ghostfire, she's unreal." Riley allowed herself a faint smile behind her helmet. Ghostfire was no longer a name. It was a statement, a declaration. She had not only survived the mechanical failure and navigated the canyon with impossible precision, but she had also stunned pilots trained to dominate the skis. Yet even in that triumph, tension remained. The F-22s were regrouping. Their pride had been bruised, their expectations shattered, but they were elite, and elite pilots didn't surrender easily. They would strike again, and Riley knew it. She adjusted her altitude, keeping a slight edge over the canyon rim, scanning the horizon. Another irregular blip appeared on her HUD, the same one she had noticed earlier. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but it added another layer of tension, another unknown variable in an already impossible scenario. "Ghostfire, this is Mason," the colonel's voice finally came over the comm, a mixture of concern and admiration. "What you just did, I don't even have words. Maintain control. We're watching, and so are they." Riley's pulse thrummed, adrenaline still coursing, but she knew he was right. The elite F-22 pilots were no longer merely curious. They were evaluating, analyzing, and realizing that Ghostfire wasn't just surviving the skis. She was dominating them. Her mind flicked to her squadron, the pilots who had mocked her just days ago, the ones who had whispered doubt behind her back. Their expressions on the HUD feeds reflected what she felt in her chest: awe, disbelief, and an unspoken realization that they had underestimated her completely. And yet Riley didn't have time to revel in the glory. Engine 1 was still failing. Hydraulic systems were still unstable. The chase was not over. Ghostfire had proven herself, yes, but proving was not enough. Survival demanded constant vigilance, constant calculation, constant mastery of both machine and mind. She took a deep breath, letting the roar of the jet fill her ears. Every maneuver, every decision, every flick of a switch carried consequence. But she was ready. Ghostfire was alive, unstoppable, and the sky was hers for the moment. The F-22 pilots, now visibly shaken, attempted to coordinate a new approach, but the momentum had shifted. Ghostfire had shown them what audacity, precision, and instinct could accomplish when wielded by someone underestimated, someone dismissed, someone who refused to yield. Her pulse steadied, her hands gripping the controls with confidence, her eyes narrowing behind the visor. The canyon stretched before her, jagged and unforgiving, but she had turned it into a proving ground. The sky was hers for now. And somewhere deep in the rhythm of the roaring engines, the flicker of warning lights, and the pulse of adrenaline, Riley realized something that went beyond skill, beyond survival. She had become a ghost in the sky, a legend in the making, a name that would echo in the minds of those who had dared to doubt her. Ghostfire. And the pilots chasing her, the elite, the arrogant, the best of the best, were left with one chilling thought: we underestimated her. And that was a mistake. The desert sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the jagged canyon walls in hues of molten gold and deep crimson, as Riley Hayes guided her jet toward the runway. Ghostfire had survived the impossible: engine failure, hydraulic instability, near-death canyon maneuvers, and the relentless pursuit of the F-22 pilots. But the challenge was far from over. Landing a jet on the tarmac while the aircraft was groaning under mechanical strain demanded precision sharper than anything she had executed in the skis above. Her hands gripped the throttle and joystick, muscles tense but movements precise. The HUD flickered warnings: Engine 1 critically low, hydraulic pressure fluctuating dangerously. Every second, every adjustment counted. One mistake now would erase every victory of the past hour. "Ghostfire, you're clear for approach," Mason's voice came over the comm, steady but tinged with urgency. "But take it slow. This isn't over yet. Systems are compromised." Riley's pulse was a drumbeat in her chest. She nodded to herself, though no one could see. Ghostfire didn't need acknowledgement. Ghostfire needed execution. The runway stretched out like a narrow ribbon against the desert backdrop. Dust swirled in tiny eddies as her jet descended, engine whining in protest. She adjusted flaps, recalibrated hydraulic control, and aligned perfectly with the tarmac. Every second was a calculation: airspeed, descent rate, crosswind, mechanical limitations. Behind her, the F-22 pilots maintained a distant circle, watching silently, their earlier arrogance replaced with stunned respect. The elite pilots had seen her defy the impossible, survive failure, and perform maneuvers no simulator could teach. Ghostfire was no longer a rookie in their eyes. She was a legend in the making. The first wheel touched the runway, and Riley's stomach clenched with the violent shudder of the jet as the nose dropped and the landing gear absorbed the impact. She modulated thrust carefully, slowing, keeping the plane straight as the heat of the brakes sparked against friction. Sparks flew, literal and metaphorical, as her jet struggled against the failing systems. The runway stretched out endlessly before her, a gauntlet of risk, but she threaded the plane through it with meticulous precision. The engine groaned one final time, then stabilized just enough for her to taxi safely to a stop. The cockpit was silent except for the faint hum of residual systems. Riley exhaled slowly, letting tension bleed from her shoulders. She had done it. She had survived. She had dominated. She had earned her name, Ghostfire. And then she opened the canopy. The squadron waited at the edge of the tarmac. Pilots who had mocked her, whispered doubt, and calculated her failure now stared with open mouths and wide eyes. The reality of what they had just witnessed hung in the air like electricity. Riley climbed out of the jet, her uniform streaked with sweat, her helmet under her arm, hair damp from the heat and exertion. She looked small, almost fragile, but her green eyes burned with intensity that belied her size. Silence fell. Then one of the taller pilots, the same one who had mocked her on her first day, stepped forward. His jaw was tight, his usual smirk gone. "Riley, I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice barely steady. That was insane." Another pilot, younger, whispered to the group, She's Ghostfire. She's not the rookie we thought she was." Mason stepped forward, a mix of pride and incredulity on his face. "Captain Hayes, your performance today was extraordinary. I've been flying for 20 years, and I've never seen someone handle mechanical failure and hostile pursuit with such composure and skill. You've earned more than respect today. You've earned legend." Riley allowed herself a faint smile, but her expression remained controlled. Ghostfire wasn't about ego. Ghostfire was about proving capability, defying doubt, and surviving against impossible odds. The F-22 pilots approached, keeping a respectful distance. One of them, a veteran known for his ruthless precision, nodded slowly. "Ghostfire, that was incredible. You weren't just surviving up there. You were in control the entire time. I've never seen anything like it." Riley felt a flicker of satisfaction. For years, she had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed. Today, she had proven that none of that mattered. Not skill, not determination, not courage. Ghostfire was real, and she was unstoppable. Her squadron gathered around her now, expressions a mixture of awe, curiosity, and newfound respect. The whispering that had haunted her arrival was gone. In its place was acknowledgement, admiration, and, most importantly, belief. Yet even in the midst of triumph, Riley couldn't ignore the tension that remained. Engine 1 was still unstable, hydraulics were still compromised, and the shadow of the F-22 pilot's observation lingered. Ghostfire had survived, but she had also revealed herself, and she knew the skis would never see her the same way again. She took a step back from her jet, breathing in the dry desert air, letting it fill her lungs. She had flown through failure, danger, and doubt, and emerged victorious. But the world had noticed. Word would spread, admiration would follow, and expectations would rise. Riley's eyes scanned the horizon where the F-22s had circled. She saw respect there, yes, but also calculation. They had witnessed Ghostfire's audacity, and they would remember it. The sky was no longer a place of anonymous survival. It was a stage where she had performed, and the echoes of that performance would linger. Mason clapped her on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "You've changed the game today, Hayes. Don't forget it." Riley nodded, helmet still tucked under her arm. Ghostfire had changed everything, her perception of herself, her squadron's perception of her, and the unwritten rules of the sky. The squadron dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others exchanging quiet congratulations. Riley stood alone for a moment, taking it all in, the tarmac, the desert, the fatting sun, and the roar of engines settling into silence. Ghostfire had survived the impossible, stunned the elite, and claimed her identity in a world that had doubted her. Her pulse slowed, but a spark of anticipation remained. Today had been victory, yes, but tomorrow would be another challenge. Another flight. Another test of skill, courage, and instinct. And she would face it as she had faced every challenge before, with calm, focus, and the unwavering presence of Ghostfire. The wind stirred in the desert, lifting dust across the tarmac, curling around her boots, and carrying the whispered realization of her squadron. The rookie, the new girl, the one they had mocked, was now a legend. Ghostfire. And in that moment, Riley Hayes knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the desert ridges, leaving a sky streaked with fiery orange and bruised purple. The tarmac lay quiet now, a calm after the storm of engines, alarms, and adrenaline that had defined the day. But for Riley Hayes, the calm was almost disorienting. Ghostfire, her name, her identity, her defiance, hung in the air like smoke over the desert. Everyone knew it now. Everyone had seen it. And yet, the weight of what she had accomplished was only beginning to settle. Pilots and technicians swarmed the jets, checking systems, recording flight data, and assessing the damage. Riley remained still for a moment, helmet tucked under her arm, eyes scanning the desert horizon. She felt a strange mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and something heavier, responsibility. Ghostfire wasn't just a call sign anymore. It was a symbol of what she could do under pressure, what she could endure, and what she could inspire. Lieutenant Colonel Mason approached, his expression unreadable. Riley braced herself, unsure if he would offer scolding for taking such risks or praise for surviving them. Instead, he extended his hand and nodded slowly. "Hayes," he said, voice steady, tinged with awe, "what you did today, I've seen few pilots in 25 years handle failure, danger, and hostile engagement the way you did. Ghostfire isn't just a call sign. It's a standard now. And you said it." Riley's pulse quickened. A standard, not a nickname, not a badge. A standard. She had faced mechanical failure, elite pilots, and nearly impossible maneuvers, and she had set the bar higher than anyone had imagined. Around her, the squadron buzzed quietly. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by glances toward Riley. No one mocked her now. Their disbelief had transformed into respect and a hint of fear. Ghostfire was no longer the rookie. Ghostfire was the force that had reshaped expectations in the skies. A group of F-22 pilots lingered at a distance, still processing what they had seen. One of them, a veteran with a steely reputation, walked forward. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Rookie Ghostfire, you made the impossible look effortless. I've trained with some of the best, and I've never seen anyone handle a failing jet while pulling maneuvers like that. Not even close." Riley nodded, keeping her expression calm. Praise, though gratifying, wasn't the point. Survival was the point. Mastery was the point. Defying expectation was the point. And yet, a subtle thrill ran through her, a recognition that she had shifted the perception of what a pilot could be, especially a rookie, especially someone underestimated. Her mind flicked to the flight, the canyon, the chase, the mechanical failure. Every second had been razor-sharp focus, instinct overriding fear, skill guiding every movement. Ghostfire wasn't born from confidence. It was forged in necessity, in danger, in the raw heat of survival. Technicians finally approached, ready to tow the jet for inspection. They checked systems, scribbled notes, and exchanged quiet exclamations. Riley followed mechanically, absorbing data without letting fatigue show. She couldn't afford to relax completely, not yet. Engine 1 was failing, hydraulics were compromised, and the jet had survived by a thread. But that thread had held, and she had emerged unbroken. As the evening shadows lengthened, Mason called the squadron together. "Everyone," he began, voice commanding yet calm, "today we witnessed something extraordinary. Captain Riley Hayes, Ghostfire, showed us all what courage, skill, and determination look like in the air. This isn't just about surviving mechanical failure or executing maneuvers. This is about leadership, audacity, and redefining what's possible. Take note." The pilots looked around at one another, absorbing his words. Some still exchanged glances tinged with awe. Others, those who had mocked Riley before, now shifted uneasily, realizing how deeply their assumptions had misjudged her. Riley allowed herself a small smile. Ghostfire wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. It was about survival, mastery, and setting a standard she knew she could uphold. But the story didn't end on the tarmac. Word of her exploits spread quickly. By the next morning, her call sign, Ghostfire, was trending among military channels, aviation forums, and even social media. Clips of her flight simulations and telemetry analyses circulated, annotated by analysts who marveled at her precision and composure. She had become something larger than a pilot, a symbol of resilience, courage, and audacity. Messages arrived from colleagues, some private, some public. Praise mingled with incredulity. Did you see Ghostfire's canyon maneuver? Unreal. Rookie of the century, engine failure and still dominates. Hayes is rewriting the rules of the sky. Riley read each one, her heart steady. The recognition was gratifying, yes, but more than that, it was confirmation that she had carved her identity into the air itself. Ghostfire wasn't just a legend in her squadron, it was becoming a legacy. Later, as the desert night settled, Riley stood alone near her jet. The stars above shimmered coldly, indifferent yet beautiful. She thought of the canyon, the F-22s, the pulse of adrenaline and the roar of engines. Ghostfire had survived, but she also knew this was only the beginning. Each flight, each challenge, each push to the limit would test her. But for the first time, she didn't feel doubt. She felt power, focus, and clarity. The wind stirred faintly, carrying dust across the tarmac. Riley's gaze followed it to the horizon, to the endless expanse of sky she had claimed, however briefly. Ghostfire wasn't a nickname. Ghostfire was an identity, a symbol, and now a legend. Mason approached quietly, standing beside her. "You've changed everything, Hayes," he said softly. "Not just in the air, but for everyone who doubted you and everyone who will fly after you. Ghostfire will be remembered." Riley nodded, letting the weight of it settle. She thought of the ridicule, the whispers, the skepticism she had endured since her arrival. Ghostfire had transformed all of that into proof. Skill, courage, and audacity mattered more than age, rank, or expectation. The desert night grew darker, stars reflecting in her visor as she finally allowed herself to exhale fully. Ghostfire had survived the impossible. Ghostfire had stunned the best. Ghostfire had emerged unbroken and unstoppable. And somewhere deep in the rhythm of engines, adrenaline, and the endless sky, Riley Hayes knew one immutable truth. She was no longer the rookie. She was Ghostfire. And Ghostfire was forever.